Welcome to Black Athletes Who Paved the Way, where we honor the fearless trailblazers who stood at the intersection of sports and social change. I'm Monica Pearson. The 1968 Summer Olympic Games in Mexico City played host to one of the most iconic moments of the civil rights movement. After a near boycott by black athletes, sprinters Tommie Smith and John Carlos would go on to win the gold and bronze medals in the 200-meter race. Now, during the medal ceremony, Smith and Carlos each raised a black glove fist in a powerful salute for human rights and equality. Their silent gesture became a lasting symbol in the fight against racial injustice. This Black History Month, we celebrate their courage by bringing you archival interviews from Tommie Smith, John Carlos, and other Olympians who witnessed this historic event live. We begin with gold medal winner Tommie Smith, who appeared on the Tim McCarver Show in 2006. He is joined by Olympic hurdler and two-time gold medalist Edwin Moses.
Today's guests are true legends of American track and field. One was a hurdler who won 2 Olympic gold medals in an astonishing 122 consecutive 400-meter races from 1977 to 1987. The other was a sprinter who held a record 11 world and Olympic records simultaneously, and who, while on the victory stand at the 1968 Games, impacted forever on American sports and social history. It's with great admiration that I welcome Edwin Moses and Tommie Smith. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
What's the connection between Edwin Moses and Tommie Smith? When did you guys meet initially?
We met at Division III NCAA championships in Chicago.
1976.
1976 in Chicago. And I drove up in the bus and got my athletes off, and here's this little skinny guy out there running.
You were the coach of
Oberlin College.
Of Oberlin College.
He was at Morehouse, yeah. So that's when I first really saw him. I heard his name before.
This was a year before your streak started.
This
of
was
122 consecutive.
This was Olympic year in 1976.
Right. You won your first of 2 golds.
That's right. But for me, meeting Tommie was like one of the big inspirations in my year, because I had seen him run in 1968. I had seen him run in Dayton, Ohio in 1969 in the national championships.
In 1968, you were 13 years old in high school. How did what Tommie did impact your life and your surroundings that year?
Well, I had no idea that I was going to be as great as I was in track. In fact, that was the first year that I began to run high school track, right around that time, because the Olympics, I believe, were in October.
Yes.
And so, actually, I would have been in the 8th going to the 9th grade, but to see Tommie and Lee Evans in the 400-meter relay, and during that time, it was a very volatile times in the United States. A lot of things were happening, but that's when I really began to really kind of fantasize, like most kids do, about going to the Olympics, and I wanted to be like Tommie and those guys.
In 1968, it was 4 years after the Civil Rights Bill was passed.
That's right.
The Vietnam War was raging. And you go to Mexico City to run the 200-meter along with John Carlos. You were teammates at San Jose State. And the first time that a 200 meters had been run under 20 seconds.
That's right.
Is that right?
Mexico City, yeah. Of course, before then, I had ran a 19.50 on the straightaway 200 meters. But that's the first Olympic under 20 flat, 19.83. We're held for 11 years.
A poll was taken, and the event of the Black Power Salute was the 6th most important event in the 20th century.
Yeah.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, At the time, I especially couldn't fathom the idea of it being what it was. Tommie Smith, being background of backwoods of Texas and sharecropping.
One of 12 children.
One of 12 children, but I felt it necessary. Since I was asked, Tim, about my feeling toward the system which represented me, I had no other means of support. So I went this direction, putting my life on the line for something I believed in, not to hurt, but to make better the system which represented me.
Did you know when you did that you were putting your life on the line? Did you know that the ramifications when you got back to the country was going to be
as severe
as it was?
It was before then. This wasn't a spur of the moment coordinated idea. This started back a year and a half before the Olympic Project for Human Rights. It wasn't Tommie Smith going to go out and kill somebody. Tommie Smith hated white folks. It wasn't about that. It was about the necessity to be a part of a system equally, not to hurt, not to deface or defame.
Did you think of any other way than the way, because I mean, it could have been possible that you would not have won the 200 meter. I mean, that was possible.
Oh, sure. But
and then you don't have a chance to say what you wanted to say or protest the way you wanted to protest.
Exactly. Yeah, right. How would I answer that? Is I had no choice. As I had no choice to do what I did, what prompted me to do it. There was no choice to do anything else. I don't even think, I didn't have a backup plan. Second place. That's not a backup plan. That, to me, it was a failure because I had to do what I had to do. And it was a divine entity. It wasn't, oh, Tommie Smith is going out, he's going to win her. No. Tommie Smith was scared. Tommie Smith wanted to find the covers to get under and be cool. But I couldn't do it because it was out of my hands.
We'll be back with Edwin Moses and Tommie Smith, talk about the ramifications of what Tommie did back in 1968, right after this.
Black Athletes Who Paved the Way is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Make your moves, we'll make them count.
As ex-athletes, we're all familiar with the competition, the feeling you get before competition, the butterflies, all of the things, the apprehension, and all of that. It's interesting, I think, to note that your apprehension and nervousness came after the race. Take us through that moment that you and John, but before you got up on the podium. I mean, a lot of kids that are watching today, they've never seen it. Take us through everything that was going through your mind and what happened when you got back to the States.
Well, during the time, Tim, it was the whole American system was changing. And I believe then, as now, that athletes should take a role in the growing of our system. And back during those times, I felt a necessity to give a part of me even then, though a lot of people didn't understand that then. They thought I was a radical idiot or some militant person who was out to do something with obvious bad thoughts, but it wasn't.
But the way it was accepted in the United States, you got back to the United States, Avery Brundage, number one, was waving the banner saying that he didn't want any political, he was the IOC chairman, right? And he did not want any political statements made on the stand. Did they try to take the gold medal away from you?
Oh, of course. They had to do something. I can understand that. You know, I'm not that remiss to believe that I was okay and they weren't going to fight. I knew they were going to fight because of what happened really embarrassed a lot of folks, especially Douglas Roby, who was the president of the USOC.
Olympic Committee.
Yeah, and Avery Brundage was the president of the IOC, also happens to be an American. So he had to put pressure on the American president to do something to these, as they called us, boys at that time.
Doesn't a protest of any kind almost always embarrass somebody?
Some way.
I think that protest was new in the 60s. I mean, people didn't protest here in America publicly until the 60s. And you had Dr. King, you had Mahatma Gandhi, you had major protests in the world. But I think Tommie's protest is probably the protest that made, outside of the marching of Dr. King and so forth, the protest that really shook the world. And I was 13 years old, and my father was an educator, and so everything was explained to me in terms of what was happening. So it wasn't really a protest about black activism. It was a protest about doing the right thing, and there were lots of people around the world who were talking about doing the right thing.
Did you ever think of following that up, what Tommie did in 1968? Did you think about that in 1976? Or with your other gold medal, I believe, in 1984 in L.A.?
Well, the first thing, as Tommie mentioned, the first thing you have to do is put yourself in a position to win. Otherwise, there's no protest. And I agree with what Tommie said. I mean, my winning streak was really kind of the same thing. I wanted to win because I knew that there was a bit more to my winning than just winning track and field races. To me, it was something that I internalized and something that I knew would be meaningful. And even today, you know, I'm involved in really trying to make a difference in the world. And I think from experiencing what Dr. Smith did on the victory stand, it became a part of my life.
Just quickly, before we go to a break, would you do that today if you won the 200-meter race in the same thing, under the same circumstances?
I would even run the hurdles.
Tommie Smith's commitment to activism extended far beyond the 19th Olympiad. After earning a master's degree in sociology, he spent over 30 years as an educator, teaching the importance of social change. Coming up, hear from bronze medal winner John Carlos when Black Athletes Who Paved the Way returns. In October 1967, Tommie Smith and John Carlos helped form the Olympic Project for Human Rights. The group called for Black athletes to boycott the '68 Summer Games in protest of inequality and racism in sports. Although that boycott was voted down, both men still found a way to make their voices heard. John Carlos sat down with Jim Moskowitz in 2019 to share the reasons for the proposed boycott that started it all, and how he and Tommie came up with the idea for their protest.
I'm Jim Moskowitz, the executive producer of The James Brown Show, and I'm in Las Vegas stepping in for JB. 2018 marks the 50th anniversary of the storied Mexico City Olympics, and my guest was a major part of that story. It is my pleasure to welcome John Carlos.
Well, Jim, it's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much, John. Let's talk about your transition from outstanding sprinter to Olympic political activist. There was, of course, a great momentum to have a boycott among many of the black athletes. People were very concerned about Muhammad Ali's title being stripped, upset about the lack of black assistant coaches.
Black coaches, period.
Very concerned about a fascist, Avery Brundage, being the head of the U.S. Olympic Committee, and having had no problems with the Nazi salute at the 1936 Games. And then, of course, Rhodesia and South Africa's participation in the Games. So tell us, please, if you can, what this was like going into that summer. How serious was the boycott threat?
Well, Tommie Smith was at the World Games, and reporters approached him and asked him, you know, what the potential was of a possible boycott. And Tommie elaborated on the fact that, yeah, we have a system at San Jose State where we're studying the idea of possibly boycotting the Olympic Games. And I think the press picked that up, and then it became this big roar about whether the blacks were going to boycott. But that didn't deter us from what we were doing. At that particular time, we were in the research section of the boycott. We had a library not too far from where they erected the statues, actually. We used to go through there and do a tremendous amount of research on the factors about Avery Brundage being the head of the Olympic Committee, about the fact that they wanted to strip Muhammad Ali for him being a black man and having a black vision. These are things that we were very concerned about, but we had to educate ourselves in order to have a collective body to say, well, we're willing to boycott. And I'm saying collective body, meaning all of the athletes, blacks in particular, but those that might have felt sympathetic to the black cause. So we had to do the research in order to educate the young athletes that was out there from the various schools throughout the country.
This is an image that will be forever imprinted in the minds not only of sports fans, but of tens of millions of Americans and billions throughout the world. This is, of course, the culmination of the protest that you conceived of with a boycott. The boycott was dropped, and you and Tommie Smith had the idea of making a protest if you were among the medalists, and there was certainly a good chance of that.
You know, after the quarter semi, my concern was, why did I come to the games? I came to the games merely because I wanted to make a statement, merely because the boycott was called off. The issues were still confronting society, and it had to be brought to the light. So I approached Tommie after the quarter semi and said, man, I'm disenchanted about the fact that the boycott was called off. I want to make a statement. What's your take? He said he agreed. Then from that point, then we started talking about what artifacts we had. He had gloves, I had beads, he had a scarf, I had a black sweater. We both were wearing black socks. I felt it was very imperative that we take the Puma shoe out there because the Puma shoe was the shoe company that supported minority kids that didn't have. And then once we got to the games, it was just a matter of us going through the rounds. You know, we were prepared physically to go through the rounds, and then whether we would have the courage or the audacity to step out and say we want to make a statement for humanity. Everyone got twisted and said it was a black power salute. The only black power was the black fannies running down the track. But relative to us making a statement that reflected by the buttons that we had on our chest said Olympic Project for Human Rights, they took the humanity issue and threw it through the curb and just put black power in there to intimidate society and think it was just concerns about black people, but we was concerned about all people.
Following his bronze medal finish in Mexico City, John Carlos remained a fixture in the sport of track and field. He helped lead San Jose State to their first NCAA team championship in 1969 and was part of the organizing committee for the 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles. When black athletes who paved the way returns, Olympic gold medalist Wyomia Tyus shares her experience watching the protests live from the stands. The 1968 Summer Games was not the first Olympics for American track athlete Wyomia Tyus, but it may be her most significant. At just 23 years old, she became the first person, male or female, to win back-to-back gold medals in the 100-meter sprint. Shortly after her record-setting performance, she was in the stands to cheer on Tommie Smith and John Carlos. In her 2019 interview with Jim Motzkovitz, Wyomia Tyus shares what it was like to be there in that moment and what she did to show her support.
We're back with Wyomia Tyus, the three-time gold medal winner. After winning in 1964 to the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, there was this Olympic boycott discussion, as we know, and there was a tremendous movement. It was a human rights movement. It was not just a black African-American movement. Did you consider boycotting the Olympics?
Well, my answer to that, and the press, you know, they would ask that question, are you going to boycott the Olympics? And my first thing was, well, first of all, you have to make the team in order to boycott it. You know, that's the first, that was the key.
That's a big presumption.
Yeah, you know, you never know, because a lot of people, no matter how well they're competing, anything could happen. So and I said, we will see what happens when we get there, and once I get to 68, once I make the team, and we'll talk about it. And I was in you know, they talked about the boycott. We could never decide how they're going to do it, what they're going to do, when they're going to do it. So it got to the point, it's whatever each athlete would like to do, however they feel they should show their support for the human rights movement. And my support was the fact that I wore dark shorts during the whole Olympic Games. And that was my support. And then, you know, I think most people, when they think of the old 68 Games, they think of what happened on the victory stand.
Well, I do want to talk with you about that. You're being a spectator at the Mexico City Games in 1968. Please tell us your initial reactions and the aftermath.
I had finished 100 meters and I won and all that. And I was back at the stadium because I wanted to see my other fellow athletes competing. So when I was standing over, Tommie, Carlos, then they were coming out, and Peter Norman were coming out. So I was cheering and yelling, and I looked down and I'm like, oh, they don't have on any shoes. They just in their socks, and what's that about? And they walked up to the podium, and they, you know, got on the podium, and they put their medals around their necks, and then they start to play the national anthem, and the next thing I know, their fists went up like this. And I went, oh, wow, that is powerful. And then all of a sudden, the stadium itself, everybody seems like got completely quiet. And all you could hear was the music. It was so quiet, and it was like, and then you could start hearing whispers, and then you could hear people booing, you could hear people whistling, and you can also hear people cheering. And it was just, I kept going, wow, I hope nothing happens to them. I hope there's no one in the stadium that would do harm to them. And then as I was standing there and listening, it seemed like forever, and it was more like, well, I hope nothing happens to me because I look like them. If somebody's out there crazy, I don't know. I just want, you know, when this is over, how can we get out of here? How are we going to get out? And they came out. So that was when I was right there looking at that, that's what was going through my mind at that time.
Right. Now, you, of course, had 2 victories in those Olympics. You won back-to-back, of course, back-to-back Olympics, the 100 meters, and you also won as the anchor leg of the 4x100 meter relay.
Yes.
And you dedicated that to Tommie Smith and John Carlos.
I did. I did. Because we went into after winning the relay, we went into the press room, and the press was all over us. What do you think about? What do you think what they're doing? What, should they be kicked out the village? Should they be kicked off the team and all that? Do you support them? And you know, so in all of that, I said to them, yes, we support them, and I support them, and now I'm dedicating my medals to their efforts. What they were taught, what it's all about was human rights. And I said, so I'm all about that. That's what I'm about. So I'm dedicating my medals to them, my medal for the relay to them. And those are the things I said to the press, because that never got printed. None of it got really, you know, played up or anything. But it was okay, because I knew what I was fighting for. I don't have to get praised for what I believe in.
The salute to human rights by Tommie Smith and John Carlos at the 1968 Olympics transcended the boundaries of sports. Their silent protest echoed around the world, drawing global attention to racial inequality and the role of athletes in driving social change. Although both men faced intense backlash for their actions, they would ultimately be celebrated for their conviction as leaders in the civil rights movement. Thank you for watching Black Athletes Who Paved the Way and our tribute to Tommie Smith and John Carlos. I'm Monica Pearson. We'll see you the next time.